This has happened to us before where it looked like we weren't live and we were live. So we'll see. We're live now. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give a couple minutes for people to trickle in. While we're waiting, though, feel free to answer this fun poll about what the strangest thing is you did while attending an online meeting. You don't have to be honest if you don't want to. And also tell us in the chat where you're calling from. Love to hear. I'll add this to the stream so you can all watch. It can also be your answer to what you're doing during this exact event. You won't be offended. And if you say other but your lips are sealed, consider telling us in the chat. Awesome. We'll get started here in a few minutes. Feel free to grab water, coffee, some lunch, whatever time you're at. I'm with you, Julie. I feel like listening to anything while cleaning and folding laundry is always nice. Awesome. Cool. Give it about a minute or two more. Give us your answer. It's a great point, Julie. I'm definitely a multitasker during calls, but not during this one. Steve and I are locked in. All right, I think we will get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Rally AMA. For those of you who are new to our AMA series, we like to keep these discussions really casual. We've planned a discussion guide and we have it ready, but we want to cater to your questions. So throughout this hour, please drop any questions you have for Steve in the chat. And thank you to everyone who submitted ahead of time. We've worked those in and we're excited to have Steve answer those questions. One last housekeeping thing, we will be linking, we'll send out a recording after this event, as well as a written recap that has highlights and any nice resources we can share from this chat. So remember, share your questions throughout the event. We want to make sure this makes sense for you guys. So without further ado, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Lauren. I'm the content marketing manager at Rally. We are building a user research CRM to help organizations streamline and automate participant management and recruitment and get access to their own real users for research. I'm joined here by the great Steve Portigal. I'm very, very excited to have Steve here. He's going to share a little bit about himself, and then he will kick us off on our discussion about what makes research functions mature.
All right. I'm going to put some slides up then, because nothing begins and Ask Me Anything by more than me tell you something. No, but I think this will hopefully help, I don't know, frame our discussion a little bit. So sorry, let me just get all the clickings of the things to make the things. Right, and so we have slides, but can people see them? There we go. Okay. So this is like this super short deck because you didn't sign up to go to a talk, but I want to just introduce this a little bit. Just so Steve things, a couple of books of mine that you may know about. Interviewing Users is now in a second edition. And Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries is a book of stories from other researchers about the things that happen to them when they go out in the field and what we can learn from that. And then my podcast, Dollars to Donuts, there's lots of new episodes out now where I'm interviewing people that are leading research functions. So yeah, hey, you can check those things out. Yes, new episodes. I want to show this framework. Maybe this will drive some of our discussion today. I think I'm going to call back to it here. This comes from Chris Avor, and he wrote this article. The link is there where he put together. This is the first He called it design research, but yes, user research maturity model. And I think over the years, we've had lots of maturity models for product and UX and design and so on. This is the first one about research. And I've seen other versions of this, but I still like this the best. And let me just give you kind of an overview of it. So along the top, the x-axis really in this matrix, and someone can correct me, can you have axes in a matrix? I don't know. We're already getting into some crazy territory. So this is, what kind of organization are you, or what level of maturity are you at? And so his labels are laggard, early, progressing, mature. And so yeah, it goes from one to the other. And then the vertical axis, or the y-axis, I'm leading into that now, is these are sort of the areas with which Chris proposes we might consider what the maturity looks like. So what's the attitude that execs have to research? What's the scope of the research? What is its purpose? Who's doing it? Who receives it or consumes it? And then this sort of overall governance perspective. And I think for both of these axes, you could kind of tweak what you want to label these things as. I think that the model as an overall approach, I think, is really good. And then here's just this is too squinty to read, but it's in the article. This is what Chris's original piece looked like. And one thing just to call out here is that in his article, he characterized what is in each cell. What's the executive attitude of a laggard? What's the staffing of a progressing organization? I mean, I show you this just to show you that, yeah, Chris thought through and kind of populated the matrix. He didn't just describe the axes. I'm less concerned with the specifics here. I think this is very, very generalized, and to be actionable, it's got to be specific to you. This matrix also doesn't answer the question, which is the question that everyone has, is how do we move, off to the right? And then I'm just going to put this up, and then I can keep pointing back to it for the rest of our conversation. We love it depends. And this is sort of my pre-apology, but also, declaration. Like, there's so many interesting variations about where you're at exactly. And this is kind of why I'm happy to leave the cell contents out of this matrix. What does it really mean to be where you're at? And what does it really mean to kind of move to where you want to move to? So you're just pre-warned with it depends. And I think we can get into specifics here. That's why we're having an AMA and not a webinar. So I'll move on here. This is just from the most recent episode of my podcast. I talked to Daniel Escher from Remitly. And here's just one interesting aspect of maturity that I really liked. And it was about where research reports, right? This is one of the classic questions that people ask, what's the best place for research to report? And he describes this evolution that when he started leading research, the company's challenge was understanding the audience. And so research did that. But then the biggest opportunities for the company overall are improving the product. So the way that research was structured, they were in the marketing organization when that's where the biggest need for the company was. And they accomplished that. The company overall matured. And so research moved to reporting to a different part of the organization where they were going to have different impact. So I guess technically this isn't really about the research organization maturing, but about maybe the business overall maturing, and reporting structures kind of change. So there's a larger sense of maturity here than maybe just research overall, but you can think about impact and so on, like where you're having impact in the organization evolving as you kind of tick some of these boxes and build different parts of the business to their maturity. So yeah, I liked this example. It seemed kind of relevant for today. And then I'm going to pose these, but not ask them. I think these two questions are sort of implicit in all these conversations. So who are the people doing research? And so we have phrases now, thanks to Kate Towsey, like people who do research and researchers. And so that, that's in Chris's model under staffing. But also this other question, which is like, what do we mean by research? So I'm going to just put those out there and not solve them. How could you solve these? These aren't really things to be solved, but just to be mindful for us whenever we're talking about these things, we might want to take a pause. I don't mean in this conversation. I mean, when you're working on this stuff, to just decompose a little bit, like, well, what do we really mean by research? What activities? What does that look like? And associated with that is who's doing it. That always kind of provides a little more context. So yeah, and now that's the end of our AMA. Thanks everyone.
Fastest AMA ever.
Yeah. No one asked anything, and I shared all my slides, so we're good.
So we're good.
Yeah.
We've answered the question.
That was just me wanting to kind of tee up a few things to feed into the conversation, and then
Yeah, thank you for that, Steve. Yeah, that was a perfect tee up, and I really appreciated that quote you shared as well, and would love to know later how you think maturity of research functions like relates to the maturity of the business, and we can get into that in a little bit. But thanks for sharing that framework as well. I'd love to just start back a couple steps, just with how you personally kind of define a mature research practice. And I know we've talked about it depends on so many things, but are there any ways you always think about what a mature research org looks like, feels like? Yeah.
I mean, we talk about it as individuals like being lifelong learners, right? And this idea that we're always, as people, through our lives and our careers and just our non-work lives, like always wanting to be growing and learning and developing and changing. And so one of the last, I can't remember if it was Daniel or somebody else that I spoke to for my podcast, they characterized their company as an organism. And I think that sort of anthropomorphization of work, of companies. This is just, I'm giving you an it depends, but I want to at least contextualize it a little bit. Everything is changing and organizations change. And I don't think there's sort of a static point at which, ta-da, we're mature. I think ideally we're always wanting to be moving in, progressing towards more mature along whatever aspect is available to us or is interesting to us. I know it doesn't always move in that direction. So I think, the context for looking at an organization or part of an organization or a team or any aspect is to say, hey, we used to be here and now we're here. Like, I think that context, if we're going to say it depends on where were you at some time. That's what I like about learning anything, for my, as we grow as people, as we build our own skills, it's nice to take those moments and look back and say, oh my goodness, look where we are. Like, you change slowly and develop slowly. And, I think it's good. It's healthy to have those moments and say, wow, we wouldn't have been doing this kind of work a year ago. We wouldn't have had this person show up to our readout 6 months ago. And to treat yourself well by acknowledging tangible, specific, small steps to remind yourself that we're an organism, we work in organisms, and we evolve, and to kind of notice that evolution. Lauren, I didn't answer your question as you asked it at all, but
no, that was perfect.
That's how we're rolling.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, and I have a question about this, but thinking about that quote and business maturity, how important is it to, like, say a team is wanting to figure out how mature their function is, how important is it to look at the maturity of other teams within the organization and the broader organization's maturity?
I think it's important, like in terms of setting goals. You can't, it's kind of this is a negative framing. I'd rather find a positive framing, but the cliche that comes to mind is more negative about, that a chain is only strong as its weakest link. So how mature as a research organization can you be if your product organization is new? Mm-hmm. Or if your design organization is new, or as a company, your kind of overall cultural sophistication. So is research leading, like from, pulling kind of the organization up, or is research kind of pushing from the bottom, or is everybody learning together and kind of growing together? I think when companies hire new research leaders and they go through that process of everybody's meeting each other and kind of assessing where you're at, what are your goals, I think those are questions that whether it's first researchers or first research leaders kind of coming in want to understand where is the organization at, and therefore how would I approach this job of leading research or of being the first researcher. Right, a company that has not done any kind of foundational research about who are our users and how are they doing this task that we're building something for, like that's poor research maturity, but that's also poor product maturity. Like we don't know anything. So that doesn't reflect on let's say there's going to be a new research team. That doesn't really reflect on them. That's that person who's responsible saying, okay, I understand what this organization needs. We're kind of low here and high here. So I'm going to focus the effort on this piece here. So yeah, your question's good. And it's sort of, in some ways it kind of challenges the whole framing of this conversation. We're talking about research maturity. But I think you're emphasizing, like if I was going to do these slides over again, I might think differently about how to frame it, because it's clear from your question and what you're making me think about that it's the adjacent maturities as well that inform what we do, how we kind of position it. Yeah. Good question, Lauren, because you made me think about something.
Thank you. It's my job. No, I'm just kidding. But speaking of a specific secondary function, I'm curious if you see any relationship between the maturity of research and research ops, like how those kind of line up, how research ops feeds into how mature a research function is. Any thoughts there?
I'm gonna say that, and I'm leaning heavily on Chris's work in this conversation, because I really think it's a wonderful piece, and I just want to have people look at it, and it's just been helpful to me. I mean, I think Chris wrote that a few years ago. I'm gonna just hypothesize that if he wrote that article today, there'd be an operations row. That I would, I think that's the natural extension of this, and kind of why I'm presenting it as like not a carved in stone thing, but a way to look at it. We have a more sophisticated, our practice has a more sophisticated view of the importance of ops, and we can articulate what that is and what it looks like. And there may be a research ops maturity model that I don't know about, so apologies if that exists. But I think, yes, I think that's a great addition to it. We could, add another row and talk about, and you could start to easily say like, well, the laggard has no operations. And then as you progress, you have people kind of repeating the same operational things all the way along to like dedicated staff, repeatable processes. I think it makes a lot of sense to extend this thinking to include that, because it's a crucial component to accomplishing the things we want to accomplish with research.
Totally. Yeah. And I think research ops itself can really drive the maturity of a research function, and also the maturity of product org and everything, all the different pieces that fall under research. So
I found, I'm sorry, Lauren.
No, you're good. Keep going.
I've found myself having these conversations over the last however many years where, who's your first hire going to be? If there's no leader or there is a leader, and it's become more common, I think, to propose that operations is one of the first things to sort out. So to your point, that the key of research ops to improving overall maturity, like, yeah, that might be one of the first things that you, whether it's a partial person or a full person, but that kind of needs to happen in order to build the rest of it. So just long-windedly plus oneing what you said about that.
Awesome. That kind of leads into, like, I see ops as kind of an internal factor that affects research maturity. I'm wondering if you have what other internal and external factors you think affect research maturity.
Internal and external?
Yeah, like internal, I would say within the actual research team itself, and then external more org-wide.
Okay. I mean, the staffing piece is key, I think, to internal maturity within the research team. I mean, we've talked about ops already. Um, um, who do you have? How many people do you have? What skills do they have? And again, this is where I would. I'm not going to cite this with a lot of rigor, but there's the research skills framework that the research ops community put together. And what is the link? It's something like research.skills or something like that. There's some findable link that hopefully someone will share. That is a really rigorous way, I think, of assessing kind of individual skills and looking at a kind of a path towards building those skills. So yeah, to me, maturity is a really skill based more than, yes, you have processes and you have infrastructure and you have, career ladder stuff but I think, yeah, do we have a research templates and do we have a library? You could ask a lot of questions about that. But I would probably start with skills. And probably there's like a component there around breadth of skills, like individual skills, yes, but a team that can take on a range of things because they have people that know different things and have learned in that kind of organism developing way, learn different things. I think that team model of skills is an interesting kind of journey of maturity externally within the org. Yeah, so this is where sort of impact comes in, influence comes in, buy-in comes in, and I think we'll probably have questions about that. And I think here leadership is, and this has been such a steady theme in the podcast that I've done with leaders, is that they, what's the best way to have leadership bought into research? Like start off with leaders who are bought into research, which is like a terrible answer to people because not everybody is in that situation. But it seems to be fairly common in people that I talk with that they're coming into situations where it's seen as important. Leadership for research is seen as important by upper leadership and peers across other disciplines. So that I think that sort of leadership, like top leadership belief in research is it's the top of the mountain. It's the gold standard, I think, for a mature organization. It's the enabler to get there, and it can be the blocker to get beyond a certain level.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like I hear that a lot, and in our AMAs that comes up a lot. Of leadership buy-in is really important, and to varying degrees it can come and look like. I'd really quick like to go back to the skills point you were mentioning. Are there any like group or team skills, like say a team is like we're trying to upskill, or like hiring, staffing, what skills would you say would be good ground zero ones to add to your team or have your team focus on to kind of increase that maturity?
I mean, I have a bias here. My bias is about the work that I do and the stuff that I write about and that I teach. So I'll own that. But I wouldn't say interviewing skills, just like I wouldn't say survey writing skills or Qualtrics skills. I think there's that piece above it that makes us makes us better as researchers, kind of method aside, domain aside. And those are things like, and these are big words, which are sort of, you have to chew on them a little bit to get to where they're meaningful. But, we talk about words like empathy, and we talk about words like curiosity and listening. I think there's a big skill around sort of not just knowing yourself, but kind of hearing yourself. We work in fast-paced environments. We are asked to be experts. And so, developing comfort with not knowing and being able to be confident and curious, to be able to honestly ask a question that we think we're supposed to know the answers to. Like these are about knowing ourselves and kind of hearing ourselves, and being that person in the meeting that asks the question that no one's willing to ask. being able to say something. So this is maybe about storytelling, but there's an empathy and compassion aspect to it as well. Being able to do some research and bring it back in a way, and I don't mean what does your deliverable look like? I mean, how do you kind of set yourself and how do you talk to a person that you have a relationship with so that you help them hear something that's new or that's slightly new, but that's impactful and significant and might suck for them to hear, right? We've learned that the thing that we're doing is not going to work and there's another new problem to solve. Like that's a great thing to find out, but presented without compassion and without some nuance can be seen as harmful. And so these are like emotional maturity, you know, hearing your own discomfort, being sensitive to other people's discomfort, being a good storyteller. These are all in service of relationships. I guess that's maybe what it kind of gets down to, the relationships that we can build with people. And sometimes they're like at a distance relationships, kind of like we're having with everybody today. We don't all know each other and we haven't spent weeks and weeks in the same room and kind of shared ownership, but we're all trying to connect and share information and help each other learn and draw from this. So we're in a lot of environments and we work in different ways where we want to use these kind of self-knowledge and kind of emotional maturity to kind of build relationships, because that's how these things that we're trying to accomplish can change. So yeah, if I want to talk about upskilling, I think those are the things I would kind of work on because they pay off across the board. And you can do that explicitly. Like, I mean, yeah, I have taught a storytelling workshop. Like you can say, lean into that. But these are also side effects from practicing any of the more, technical skills of research. You want to practice survey writing and trying out a survey, you're going to learn humility. You're going to learn empathy, right? It is baked into everything I think that we do if we are reflective about our own learning.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think all those skills really enable researchers to be leaders in their org and to actually have impact. And when you know how to communicate your findings and what you do in research, leaders can understand it better. And I think that's like a huge unlock for research teams. So thank you for answering that. I wanted to ask a question that was submitted by Tracy. And it goes back to external factors, but how do changing times cause relatively mature research practices to become immature, even if they were working well initially?
Yeah, and Tracy hits on the organism aspect of this, that this isn't static and that things change. And yes, ideally we want them to change to get better, to become more mature. But I think that's such a great observation that things go backwards. And yeah, I mean, one thing is that the people that are in an organization change, right? Turnover, sometimes entire, leadership teams change, restructuring of the organization, changes in strategy, changes in OKRs. Those are all things that have ripple effects for everything that we do. And I think there's got to be some lag there, right? You don't know. You can, if a new leader comes in, like that's a binary thing. They were not there one day, they are there the next day, but the consequences for the practice and how their influence is just one example kind of permeates through these relationships and these dynamics probably isn't apparent for a while. So yeah, I think this question sort of raises questions in response. And I go back to the Matrix, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep saying that, but if we feel like things are less mature, it would be interesting to ask, well, what aspects are less mature? Like what has changed? And maybe there are pieces that have gone positive and pieces that have gone negative. I think sometimes our memory has biases to it. There are good old days. That's the way I love to think. It's sort of a human nature to think about the good old days. So using something a little more analytical to sort of say like, yeah, this is where we're at with any one of these attributes. And this is where we think we used to be at. And then, I think then you have a more specific why. Why has buy-in changed, or why have our skills gone down when we were kind of progressing in a certain way? So I think turnover and organizational change, but I think, yes, let's ask some questions about what that is, and how do we get there is important, but I think understanding what is it that's changed is probably where I'd want to start first.
Yeah, and you bring up this idea of having a retro and thinking, where were we? Where are we now? What's different? When doing that, who do you think should be involved in that? Is that just a research-specific discussion? Is that pulling in cross-functional partners, stakeholders? Like, how do you kind of see that discussion going, step one?
It goes back to your internal and external framing that you brought up earlier, right? And so here it depends on what aspect of maturity do you want to consider, because some are visible to you. You have a perception of, let me start again here. I would start in terms of assessment. I would start heavily with the research team. Because I think any of these can turn into like projects that we just don't have time for. But I think there's a quick sort of heuristic assessment that the research team or a subset of the research team can kind of do a quick and dirty version of. If I was interested in how do we progress, how do we move executive buy-in, for example, from laggard to mature, then, we're going to have to talk to the executives about that. If we want to understand, audience, how to change the audience, we might want to talk to people that, it's like a research sample. Who's come to our readouts? Who have we invited to the readouts that hasn't come? Who's getting sort of secondhand? Like, who can we see is looking in our repository? Who are we getting requests from that we're turning down? But I wouldn't want to say that every self-assessment has to become a research project. Mm-hmm. I would start with what sort of you can put your arms around, which is y'all. And then, as you want to build or evolve, kind of seek very specifically some of that external information.
Totally. That kind of relates to a question from Christy that she submitted. Let me pull it up really quick. About how do you recommend bridging the gap between researcher and stakeholder to advance maturity? And one thing, Christy, while Steve is answering, we're interested to what you're seeing as a gap, if you want to add into the comments. But Steve, take it away.
Yeah, that was definitely my question. What does that gap look like? Because I think, this gap might be things like, how we consider what research to do. And that might be a good place to start. So I'm guessing here a little bit about what this might look like. But, one sort of flip that I've seen in maturity is when teams evolve from doing reactive research to doing proactive research. And so when everything is reactive, you get a lot of being brought in too late, not given enough time. The problems as framed are not necessarily, they're often more tactical than strategic as articulated. And so this is sometimes the maturity gap, is that people, and it's not their job to know, right, is don't know what value research can bring. Where can we help? What kinds of decisions can we support? So when you get requests, they often reflect somebody else's less than mature understanding of what that looks like. That's when you're reactive. Those teams are often just overtasked and kind of stressed and trying to like under their gun, and trying to do everything for everybody, because that's how you, we are people pleasers, right? That's kind of some of the discipline. We love research. We want to have research be successful. So we take every opportunity to do that. Proactive research is, and it's hard to flip from one to the other. It's hard when you're kind of under these demands to kind of stop and say, all right, what we want to do is have an eye into what decisions are other teams making. Maybe this, in some cases, I know that like this might be spelled out in OKRs, or this might be spelled out in roadmaps or release schedules. For research to have visibility into what decisions and actions are other parts of the business making, our cross-functional partners, and what research do we propose to do and when, in order to provide information that we know they're going to need at that time. And so that really changes the whole dynamic about what people expect from us as researchers. And so I guess I'm hypothesizing without knowing exactly what that gap looks like for Christy, but this is really about this fundamental piece, which is like, what research do we do? And maybe that would be scope in Chris's model, and so on. But to me, it's like figuring out what research needs to be done and who's kind of making that decision.
Totally. Great, thank you. There's this question in the chat that's getting some love. It's, what are some good questions to ask / signal to look for to gauge an organizational research maturity during job hunting? And I'm assuming these questions would also be good to just ask internally, your own function, to gauge maturity as well. So curious your response.
Yes. Well, I think the proactive reactive question is a good one, and that's recency bias on my part. Yes, if I was going to talk to researchers and I was job hunting, or research leaders, managers, what research do people work on, and how is that decided? We'll start to get a picture of what is sort of the overall roadmap for this team look like, and what's the process for determining that. I might ask about barriers. These are standard questions to ask in user research anyway. You want to ask about success, and you want to ask about failure, like what's working well, what's not working well. I'd like to hear people talk about, to get some examples of when, I'm interviewing at this company, I'm talking to a researcher there. What's an example of when they've done research that's been well received? What's an example when they've done research that's not been well received? Because I think that the whys to that are going to reveal what that researcher's mental model is of how that organization works. So you might ask that person literally to talk about that organization's maturity, but whoever discovered water, it wasn't fish. My cliche count for today, like I'm going to go for 10. People inside an organization may not have reflected about this, but you're outside, so you can ask these questions and you can draw some inferences from those stories. So I think I like how the question here is about what signals might you look for. I think there's something here about it's the reporting structure, but it's also the model. It's the whole centralized versus embedded thing. And here's a great, it depends. I don't think that and this is not even me saying this, I think lots of people agree that there's no sort of ideal model. But when people talk about how do researchers, like, where do they assign to? Are they on teams? What does that sort of spread and distribution look like? Because sometimes there's embedded, and sometimes there's researchers that are sort of semi-embedded, with air quotes, with like 8 teams. So just getting that kind of org chart and responsibility map, I guess, would reveal a lot about what is research expected to work on, and what does that kind of look like. I'll stop there, but there's maybe I bet I haven't looked at the chat because we're talking, but hopefully people in the chat are weighing in with some other things that they've looked at, because I think this is a good brainstorming question.
Yeah, we're getting some great responses in the chat. Really quick aside question. I am curious, talking about models and organizational structure. I know, back to what we all say, it depends, but I'm curious what you have seen work really well for organizational models that you've seen, and if that's like led into higher maturity at all.
years ago, before Don Norman had the Nielsen Norman Group, he had a stint working like I think he worked in sort of innovation groups. So he worked at Apple, and Apple had something called ATG, which was like the most innovation space at the coolest company. This is going back decades. And then he went to some part of HP, and so I may not have this right because it was a long time ago, but I think Don Norman became famous for like reorging a lot of these sort of well-established innovation organizations where people were quite committed to how they were working. And I remember him talking, and again, this is long enough ago, I could be completely off, but what I remember him saying was it was the process of changing those structures that was meaningful as opposed to those ideal structures. And that the change was, I think, turbulent and stressful for people, but that it created opportunities to kind of break established frames and so on. So, that example I gave from Daniel Escher of like, oh, we've kind of accomplished this, and so now we're kind of moving here. I think that's kind of a rational version of it. But I think even just acknowledging that organizations are organisms and they kind of move and grow and evolve, and there is turnover and change in leadership. I think, as sort of a blunt instrument, I think changing structure it creates opportunities to do things differently. So yes, some people are embedded. Now everyone is embedded. To do that, you have to change how you hire, or you have to change, your skill level. So it's not trivial to kind of do that. And you may end up in a situation, is what's the tail and what's the dog? Cliche count, the tail wagging the dog here. What's driving what? Do you want to optimize for, your team's success as individuals, and you want to kind of improve retention? So you're going to structure it the way that people want to work. If you want to, advocate for headcount and seat at the table, cliche count goes up there, then you might optimize for what's going to have the most impact for stakeholders, but you might kind of hurt your retention if the people you have don't want to work that way. So I think looking for opportunities to change things up in a big way, because I think we all get stuck. We kind of get these paths, and we kind of go, and we hit just kind of a limit. And yeah, I don't want to drop a bomb on things, but I think sort of reinvention intentionally, every once in a while, right? I know some companies reorg all the time, and it's stressful, and you don't want to be that kind of change agent, but leaving it open as a way to get unstuck and to reinvent.
Totally. Change is hard, but often necessary, especially to, mature and make things better. We have a question. Speaking of, we've been talking about impact and how, leadership matters a lot to maturity. And we have this question in the chat. Do you see the ability to articulate the business impact of research has a play in the maturity level, both by the research team's ability versus the rest of the org's ability to articulate the business value of research?
I'm going to read that over with
my
lips won't move. Do you see the ability to articulate the business impact of research has a play in the maturity level? Absolutely. Right. So we are sort of talking indirectly about this, and I thanks for calling this out here. Yes. And I think there's maybe a couple of facets here. Maybe that's what the second part of the question kind of gets to. I think there's, the sort of generic, I like research with a capital R here. That's great. Research, capital R, has a business impact, is sort of is a way to, there's that, and then there's this piece of research can have this specific business impact if we do these things with it. I think doing the individual piece is a way to get to sort of that first sentence here. So I think this is a great thing for a research leader, to be able to speak to peers about, yeah, here's why we're saying no to requests, and here's why we're proposing this research schedule with these actions, because this is going to impact the decisions we're making and thus the business. I think so they should absolutely be having that conversation. It's best, of course, when they have a mandate, when that's what they are hired to do by senior leadership, so that they're not trying to sell up, let alone sell across. And that's what their job is defined as. That's the ideal condition. For individual contributors or people that sort of don't report up to a research leader, I think I think it's a heavy burden or an unfair expectation to be trying to change people's minds about the business value of research, kind of with capital letters in this first example. That doesn't mean that ICs don't try. I mean, that's just how we're wired. We care about research and what it can do. And of course, we talk about that. But I just want us to set our expectations realistically about how we position that or what we're trying to change people's minds. But absolutely, on a sort of, let's just call it a project basis or any sort of research initiative, we should absolutely be talking about what value doing this research will have to the business. Here's why we're doing this and not this. Here's why we're talking to these people. Here's the business question, and here's the research question that goes with it. Here's the research method that's going to best answer the research question that's going to inform the business challenge. And here, again, here's why we're doing, here's what we learned in response to this question that's about this business decision. And here's how we're going to get to making decisions based on this research. So yes, I think on a case-by-case basis, ICs that are not responsible for the overall positioning of research should be talking about that. And sometimes, I know this can be kind of a contentious topic. Do researchers make recommendations? I like hearing from people about this because you get it absolutely, and also maybe not. And then also it depends. When researchers are co-synthesizing or whether you're embedded or you have a project team that spans disciplines, talking about what the research revealed, so analyzing and synthesizing and sense making together points to what we're going to do about it. So yes, you're making recommendations, but we're making recommendations together. I guess when I hear that recommendations question, I think I'm afraid of researchers coming in with sort of naive solutions. Whereas what people that understand the technical stuff or people that understand design in a rich way know there's like 48 ways to accomplish this that can be optimized based on whatever. Then I don't want us to be like, hey, we heard this, we should do X. There's sort of a naive enthusiasm that I think hurts our credibility in terms of being able to speak about business realistically. So if we're going to make recommendations, maybe we're going to facilitate that. Maybe we're going to have a brainstorm, or maybe we're going to solicit input and do sort of paper prototyping with our colleagues to facilitate the creation of some action. So recommendations or business actions and decisions, I think, have to come out of this process. And it's not a throw it over the wall thing. It comes back to those relationships.
Totally. Yeah. And I love that idea of like researchers being facilitators too, like maybe not always recommending, but leading that discussion, leading those efforts. I think we all can safely say like researchers should play a larger role in organizations and have a lot more impact and should be leading and building those relationships, not just, contributing. Amazing. We have another question from the chat. This is a popular one, and I think we've kind of covered portions of it, but any tips for shifting, and I kind of like how this, instead of changing minds, I like shifting attitudes. It feels a little more tangible or easy to do, but any tips for shifting executive attitude toward research?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's the good suggestion here, like quick wins, low hanging fruit. I think that's a good. I think we should be realistic, and so I'm going to be a little cynical here. that, again, if you have the mandate, then you're in much better position to do this. Like managing up is hard. And we have to sort of be realistic about what we can expect. If we don't have somebody's ear, or they don't see us as, having authority, I think there are always, I think we want to feel like if we do great work, it's going to kind of shine on its own, and people will be like, wow, we asked you to do this work and it was awesome and it changed, our results, and we're grateful and we want more. We recognize the value. And I don't mean to say that doesn't happen. I think, it's sort of table stakes for us. Like, let's do great work, and, all the things that people are kind of bringing up here. And I like this point here that, sometimes you can optimize for that. If you have 40 projects, coming in, whether that's proactive or reactive, you can optimize or prioritize that list based on this objective here. There was a piece that Salesforce user researchers published a few years ago. I think there's a Medium post from Salesforce UXR, and in it they showed how they segmented their stakeholders. And it was basically like a 2x2 around influence and I think it was, sorry, I don't have it at hand here. I have it in another document here. Can I just tell you what it is here? It was like something like influence and impact. No, I can't look it up and talk at the time here.
We'll share it after. No
okay. I have the link. I just can't dig it up for you. But basically they segmented their stakeholders, and they chose, then they, in their 2x2 for each cell, they chose different strategies. So these were people to stay close to. These were people that believed in research strongly and were sort of influential. It was something like that. So they wanted to service those folks and their need. People that were kind of in the opposite, that were kind of negative, they ignored them for now. So this is kind of a long game, right? We're talking about shifting executive attitudes, but I like these examples people describe where they're not going head on. They're going to where the interest is, or where the heat is. When Aviva Rosenstein was head of research at DocuSign, she was on my podcast and talked about when they prioritized their requests, they asked people in the kind of planning process, what decisions are you going to make as a result of this research? And I think even like extracted like a social proof kind of commitment from them that they were going to act on the research. And so what she was trying to do over the longer term was create more kind of shared cultural knowledge that research changes stuff. So if you only do projects where people agree to change stuff, then kind of the cultural story is not, yeah, research was interesting, but we didn't do anything with it. You don't do research for those people. If you have more requests than you can handle, pick the ones that are going to kind of change the narrative, right? That's how you change culture. And is by telling different stories about the kinds of success you want, what you want to see. So creating that kind of portfolio for research. So it's less about hitting these, executives head on and saying like, here's a thing that we could do for you, and more kind of creating things that are visible through the organization. So yeah, you have that matrix and you prioritize your leaders, and you do work for the ones that are going to use it and champion it and talk about it. You're not addressing those reluctant leaders. You're creating information that other people are going to tell stories about. This takes longer and it feels less like you're tackling it. But that is, I think, the game of culture change, right? It's taking it's acknowledging that the culture changes more slowly, and that it's through relationships, and it's through time, and it's through repetition.
Totally. I love that. It reminds me of something our last AMA, Roy, who leads UX at Zapier. He talked about following up on research and not just sending it out into the void, hoping it goes somewhere, but like tracking people down and saying like, what did you do with this? How did you use this? And like, I think getting change, like getting the buy-in early on that we will make a change from this is a better way to do it, and a good thing to work into your projects. But I love that. And I think you're totally right. That's the way that culture changes slowly, but it does change that way. We are getting close to the end of time. And also I want to say sorry to everyone. I know there was a blip in contrast. Sorry about that. Glad we're all back. But in the last couple minutes, I wanted to highlight a question that Christopher sent up, which I thought was really great. We were kind of talking about how researchers are doing a lot, and there's a lot we're trying to tackle, and we've kind of talked about this. Maturity sometimes turns into a project. So what tactical advice would you give for teams that want to scale their maturity, but have to do that while also balancing everyday research responsibilities, or are a smaller team, or don't have, a ton of bandwidth?
I'm going to get one last cliche in here. I feel very happy about that. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And maturity is the elephant, right? We're talking about it in this conversation, and the questions, I think, appropriately reflect it as this like bigger sort of scale concept. And again, I'll just point back to the Chris's framework. Like, it's not really maturity; it's these elements of it. And so you can pick one part and work on that. So, question back to Christopher, and Christopher's team is like, well, what's important to you? What's the current state around that thing, and what would it look like for you to move one cell to the right in that matrix? So yeah, if there's so much to do, right? And I think that's the elephant. And so finding ways to make changes, that I think this question is very realistic. We can't do everything, and we've got a lot of other stuff to do. So don't try to fix everything about everything. And what's important to you? What do you care about? What would move the needle? Any of those things I think are great places to start. If you do one thing different, you can say, hey, we just moved this to the right. There is this thing called, I'm sure we've seen versions of this, like 2x2 matrix that's for prioritization. That is, right, it's about effort and impact. I think those are I looked at it earlier today, and then of course I forgot what the axes were. Effort and value. So I think if you just pick the thing you want to work on, and then you could very easily come up with 40 things, just prioritize them based on what's effort and what's value. And that matrix kind of says like, hey, low effort, high value, do first, greater effort, greater value, do next, and then things that provide less value, don't do. So it's really two activities, right? What do you care about, and sort of what does improvement look like? And then prioritize those, and the method to do that is already spelled out, right? And then pick one and do it. And then when you have time, pick the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I did share that in the chat quickly. So we're down to 2 minutes. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We're so grateful to everyone for joining us. I know there were lots of questions we didn't get to, but we will try to answer those async in our recap. But I just wanted to wrap up by asking Steve, what keeps you passionate and motivated about user research after so many years in the field, and what are you most looking forward to about the future?
Right. I feel like I should have like a cigarette and a glass of whiskey. Oh, let me tell you. Yeah, I mean, God, research is just fascinating. Like the act of research is just so wonderful, and I know it just gives me a lot of joy. And I love the collaborative aspect of it. It's great to sort of talk to people. I love interviews. That's my method of choice. But I love collaboratively synthesizing with people and figuring something out by talking aloud that none of us could have got to. There's just a really joyous spark of discovery there, where you're like, oh yeah, this is the thing. This is the thing we need to understand, and this is huge. It's going to change everything that we do. I love those moments. I love working with people to kind of get there.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Steve, it has been such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you to everyone that joined. all the insights that were shared were amazing, and I can't wait to put those onto a recap after. So thank you, everyone. The recording will be available after, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and keep thinking about maturity and research practices and keep the conversation going. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. See ya.